Under the suffocating weight of grief and suspicion, Luna's funeral unfolded like a theater of contradictions, part mourning, part reckoning. The air inside the hall was thick with incense and tension, a strange stillness trembling beneath every whispered condolence. Poppy stood at the far end, her eyes swollen yet dry, refusing to meet Lise, who herself clung to composure like a crumbling mask. Their silence screamed louder than any eulogy. Bill stood near the casket, jaw tight, trying to hold onto his calm as though control might somehow redeem the chaos he helped create. Katie, standing slightly behind him, clasped her hands together and prayed quietly, not for Luna, whom she believed finally free, but for the living left to bear the unbearable truth. Every breath in that room felt borrowed, waiting for the next blow of revelation that had stalked this family since Luna's death. When the organ fell silent and the casket began its slow glide toward the center of the hall, the weight of loss seemed to settle in. Faces lowered, lips trembled, and the silence was pierced only by the squeak of wheels on marble. Then, like a cruel interruption from the world outside, the doorbell of the funeral home rang. The sound echoed, sharp and alien, severing the fragile thread of solemnity. Will, already restless from the scrutiny of others and the ghosts of his own guilt, muttered under his breath and walked toward the entrance. He thought it was another reporter, someone chasing one more cruel headline from the wreckage of his family's tragedy. But what greeted him on the other side was not a camera, not a face, but an object so small and devastating it turned the air inside him cold. There, on the doorstep, sat a cradle, delicate, wrapped in a white cloth, almost glowing under the dim afternoon light. For a heartbeat, Will thought it was a joke, a twisted symbol sent by someone who wanted to mock Luna's death. But the moment his trembling hands brushed the fabric, his world imploded. A folded note clung to the cradle, the ink slightly smeared, as if written in haste or tears. "You said I lost everything," it read, "but I could never let our child disappear." The handwriting, sharp, looping, familiar, was undeniably Luna's. The shock froze him mid-breath. He pulled the cloth back, and what lay beneath shattered the last of his composure. A newborn, still fragile and pink, blinked up at him. The baby's tiny face bore the unmistakable imprint of Will's own, the same curve of the lips, the same soft arch of the eyebrows, the same eyes that mirrored his confusion and terror. For a moment, sound left him entirely. Then came a scream, raw and piercing, splitting the air like glass shattering. Everyone inside the hall turned as one. Conversations stopped, prayers broke, and the calm that had barely been holding collapsed into pandemonium. Will stood trembling, holding the child against his chest as if afraid it would vanish if he blinked. His face had gone pale, the color drained from his world. When Bill rushed forward, his shock was not just paternal but existential, the kind of horror that comes when the dead refuse to stay buried. Poppy's knees buckled, Lee gasped, and Katie, sensing the tremor in the room before seeing the cause, pressed a hand to her mouth. And at the far end of the hall, Detective Baker, who had been standing stoically by the entrance, went ashen. His eyes flickered, not with confusion, but recognition. In that instant, Will's cry wasn't the only one echoing through the hall. The truth, long buried under lies and paperwork, was clawing its way back to the surface. What followed was chaos disguised as ceremony. The funeral, meant to bring closure, became a courtroom without walls. Questions erupted from every corner. How could Luna's child still be alive when the official record stated she miscarried? Who signed the report? Who authorized the burial of a baby that never truly died? Baker's silence grew heavier by the second, his fingers twitching against the badge that suddenly felt like a brand. Will, still clutching the baby, demanded answers, but the only sound that came from Baker was the grinding of teeth and the faint creak of guilt. Bill, oscillating between rage and disbelief, turned to him, sensing that the detective's pale face hid more than shock. The funeral home, once a place of solemnity, now pulsed with accusation and fear, the scent of flowers turning sickly sweet in the heated air. Baker finally spoke, voice strained, words slipping like stones into water. He explained that the prison's medical report confirmed Luna's miscarriage weeks before her release. The attending physician had filed the death certificate of the fetus, and the documents were signed, sealed, and logged under state supervision. But as he spoke, his eyes darted toward the baby, then away, betraying something that no amount of protocol could mask. "Who signed it?" Bill pressed, his voice low but trembling with fury. Baker hesitated. The name that finally left his mouth fell like a curse, a doctor long suspected of tampering with medical files in exchange for silence and favors. A doctor connected to people with the power to erase lives as easily as they wrote prescriptions. The realization spread through the room like a contagion. Luna's miscarriage had been staged. Someone had paid for her silence, and possibly her death. The discovery tore open every hidden wound. Lee's eyes filled with horror. She had blamed Luna for her own destruction, for dragging the family into scandal, but now guilt carved into her like a knife. Poppy's grief transformed into fury, the kind that burns cold and clear. She turned on Baker, accusing him of aiding a cover-up. Katie, whose prayers had once been for peace, now whispered that this was divine punishment, the truth no one wanted but everyone deserved. Will, the unwilling father of a miracle, stood at the center of it all, torn between elation and terror. Even those who had hated Luna found themselves trembling. If the child lived, then everything they had believed about Luna's fall was a lie. The question that followed was unbearable. Had Luna herself been silenced because of this child? The tension spiraled. Reporters began to swarm outside the funeral home, drawn by the chaos within. Cameras flashed through the windows, their bulbs igniting like lightning as the world outside caught scent of the scandal. Inside, the temperature rose. Baker stammered, trying to explain that he had only followed orders, that the request to close Luna's file came from higher up, from someone with ties to both the police department and the hospital board. Every word he spoke tightened the noose around him. Katie demanded to know why the child had been hidden. Lee demanded to know how long Baker had known. Will, voice cracking, asked the only question that mattered. Why had they all been made to mourn a lie? No one had an answer, but the truth, like smoke, was beginning to show through the cracks. Evidence surfaced that Luna had been moved to a private facility days before her supposed miscarriage, under the pretense of mental distress. The hospital logs, it turned out, had gaps, entire pages missing, names altered. Surveillance footage had been erased. A nurse who once worked the night shift vanished weeks later, never to be seen again. And then came the worst revelation of all. The note found with the baby bore traces of Luna's handwriting, yes, but also fingerprints belonging to someone still alive, someone inside the very system meant to protect her. Baker's reaction when this was mentioned, the way his jaw tightened, the tremor in his hand, confirmed what everyone feared. He had been complicit. Whether out of greed or guilt, he had helped bury the truth. The funeral collapsed into chaos. Police were called, statements demanded, and the once peaceful hall became a war zone of accusations. The casket remained unopened, its silent occupant now overshadowed by the wailing of a child who shouldn't exist. The baby, tiny and innocent, became a symbol, not of redemption, but of exposure. The Spencer and Forrester families, long divided by class and ambition, now stood bound by a single horrifying question: who had orchestrated the cover-up, and why? Was it to punish Luna for defying someone powerful? Or to protect a reputation, a fortune, or a secret that could shatter everything they stood for? Each face in that room hid a story, and every story led back to the same rot that had been festering beneath their polished lives for years. As the night fell and the crowd thinned, Will sat alone in the chapel, the baby sleeping against his chest. He looked down at the child, his child, and felt the weight of a destiny he had never chosen. Around him, whispers floated through the air like restless spirits. Bill and Katie argued in hushed tones about what to do next. Lee and Poppy retreated into separate corners of silence. Baker had vanished, leaving behind a badge and a statement too thin to cover the enormity of his sins. Somewhere outside, a car engine started, and some swore they saw a woman's shadow move past the gate, the same delicate tilt of head, the same grace that had haunted them all. Some whispered that Luna had never died, that the coffin was empty, that the entire funeral was a trap to lure the guilty into the open. By dawn, the story had already broken. The headlines screamed of corruption, conspiracy, and rebirth. But inside the fractured families, silence remained. The truth had not freed them, it had bound them even tighter in fear. And as we'll watch the baby stir, its eyes reflecting a light both familiar and strange, he realized that this was only the beginning. The past was not buried with Luna. It was alive, breathing, demanding justice. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of a lullaby drifted through the air, the same one Luna once hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. And in that haunting melody, the living and the dead found themselves tied together once more, not by love, but by the unbearable truth that some lies refuse to stay buried. When Will's scream tore through the air, it was as if time itself fractured. The echo rippled through the funeral hall, shaking the fragile composure of everyone present. Katie's prayer beads slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor like tiny drops of guilt, while Bill froze for a fraction of a second before instinct took over and he ran. When they reached Will, the sight before them was almost too much to comprehend. He stood trembling, clutching a newborn in his arms, small, red, alive. The baby's soft cry rose above the stunned silence, fragile yet undeniable, breaking through the layers of mourning and decorum. For a brief moment, nobody breathed. Then the room erupted. Questions, gasps, whispers, all crashing into one another like waves against stone. Katie pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes darting from Will to the child, then to Bill, as if searching for an explanation that could make any of this make sense. But nothing about this day had ever been meant to make sense. It was as though the dead themselves had chosen to rise and reclaim the truth that everyone else had buried. Before anyone could regain composure, a funeral home attendant rushed forward, pale and breathless, calling for Bill. His voice cracked under the weight of panic. "There's something wrong with the coffin," he stammered. The words alone chilled the blood of everyone within earshot. Bill exchanged a look with Katie, half dread, half disbelief, and followed the man toward the casket that stood at the center of the hall, draped in solemn silk and flowers. The murmurs swelled as people followed, drawn by morbid curiosity and a sense that they were about to witness something far more horrifying than grief. The attendant's hands shook as he lifted the lid, and what spilled out was not Luna, not even a trace of her, but a mess of deception, a coffin filled with sandbags and a single folded prison uniform. The symbol was unmistakable. The message, cruelly clear. The funeral had been staged. Either Luna's body had been stolen, or it had never been there at all. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Katie staggered backward, clutching her chest. Bill's face hardened, drained of color, but filled with fury. Will stared blankly, the baby still crying softly in his arms, unaware of the chaos its existence had unleashed. The pristine funeral cloth slipped from the coffin and fluttered to the ground, revealing beneath it the stark emptiness that mirrored everyone's disbelief. Cameras from reporters, once kept at bay, now began flashing from the doorway as chaos turned into spectacle. Somewhere among the shrieks and questions, someone shouted that this was a crime, that Luna's body had been switched, that someone had known exactly what they were doing. But for Will, every sound faded into static. His mind spun with one unbearable truth: the letter. He unfolded the paper that had been attached to the cradle, his fingers trembling. He hadn't noticed before that it was written on both sides. When he turned it over, the air around him seemed to still. Scrawled across the back, in Luna's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "When you gathered to bury me, I was fighting to keep our child alive." It wasn't just a confession, it was a warning, a declaration, and perhaps a promise. Katie's lips parted as she read over his shoulder, and the horror that filled her eyes mirrored the disbelief spreading through the room. Bill's expression darkened into something between dread and anger. The meaning was undeniable. Luna's death had been a lie, one woven so tightly into official reports, medical files, and police statements that no one had questioned it. Until now. The question rippled through every mind like an electric current. Was Luna still alive? The very possibility tore apart everything the Spencers and Forresters had built their narratives upon. Bill's first instinct was denial. He refused to believe Luna could have survived the crash, the arrest, the scandal. He told himself it was impossible, just another sick manipulation, someone using her name to destroy what was left of his family. But beneath that rational fury was something he couldn't silence: fear. A cold, crawling dread that maybe Luna wasn't gone at all, and that this baby, this note, this mockery of a funeral, was her way of telling them that she was watching. Katie, meanwhile, felt a different kind of terror. Luna's words echoed in her mind. When you buried me, had they all been part of the burial, willingly or not? Had their silence, their decisions, their desire for peace made them accomplices in erasing her? And then there was Will. Standing under the weight of every eye in the room, he could feel his own guilt suffocating him. His hands shook as he looked at his child, and memories assaulted him in waves. He remembered the last time he saw Luna, the anger in her voice when she said he had destroyed everything she had left. He remembered the cruel words he'd spat in return, the way he'd accused her of manipulation, of using her pregnancy as leverage. "You've lost everything," he had said. Now those words came back to choke him. He had believed she'd miscarried. He had believed she was gone. But what if she had been alive, alone, fighting to protect the very child he'd denied? The possibility tore through him with unbearable force. The baby's eyes, his own eyes, stared up at him as if demanding he face every sin he'd tried to forget. Baker, the detective assigned to Luna's case, hovered near the back, sweat gleaming on his temples. His usual stoicism had vanished, replaced by something haunted. When Bill's furious gaze turned toward him, the detective visibly flinched. "You told us she lost the baby," Bill growled, his voice low and shaking. Baker opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for words that could contain the scale of what was unraveling. "The report was verified," he stammered, but no one believed him. "By whom?" Katie demanded. "Who signed the report?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Baker's eyes darted to the coffin, to the baby, then to Will, and something in his expression gave him away. He knew more than he was admitting. Bill advanced on him, fists clenched, fury radiating from every movement. "You said she was dead," he hissed. "You said she miscarried. You lied to all of us." The detective's voice cracked under the weight of it. "I was told to close the file," he said finally, barely above a whisper. There were higher orders. People who wanted her gone. The words sent a collective shiver through the room. "Gone," Katie repeated, her voice trembling. "Or silenced." The implication hung there, poisonous and undeniable. If Luna had faked her death, she had done it with help. If she hadn't, then someone had done it to her, and now that person had made a terrible mistake by leaving behind living proof. The baby became the center of everything, the one piece of truth in a storm of lies. Katie looked at the infant, a mixture of awe and terror in her expression. Bill, however, saw something else: danger. If Luna was alive, she was no longer a victim. She was a threat. "She's sending a message," Bill muttered under his breath, pacing. "This isn't about the child. It's about revenge. She wants to remind us that she's still out there, that we'll never escape her shadow." His words carried more fear than anger. In his mind, Luna was no longer the broken woman they had tried to forget. She was a ghost armed with the power of truth, and truth, in the hands of someone wronged, could destroy empires. Will sank into a pew, his body heavy with guilt. Every noise around him seemed distant, like an echo from another world. His thoughts turned inward, looping through memories that now felt distorted. Had Luna hinted at this? Had she known she couldn't trust anyone? Not him, not the police, not even her own family? He imagined her alone, in some nameless place, holding their child and whispering promises that no one believed. If she had faked her death, it was because she knew no one would save her. The realization broke something inside him. For the first time, he didn't know whether to hope she was alive or pray that she wasn't suffering somewhere out there, watching them all fall apart. The hours stretched on, the funeral now a grotesque theater of accusations. Reporters burst through the doors, capturing the chaos. Poppy screamed that this was madness. Lee demanded police reinforcements, and Katie, desperate to bring order, tried to reason with Bill, who was spiraling into paranoia. He spoke of cover-ups, blackmail, the possibility that Luna had powerful allies. Every theory grew darker, every fear more vivid. Baker slipped away during the commotion, but not before Will caught sight of him whispering into his phone. The detective's expression wasn't guilt anymore, it was panic. Whoever he was talking to, they were the reason this had all been possible. And somewhere out there Luna might have been listening too. Night fell, and still, the truth refused to settle. The baby, exhausted from the noise, finally slept in Katie's arms, her tears silently falling onto its blanket. Bill stood by the shattered coffin, staring into the emptiness where Luna's body should have been. "If she's alive," he murmured, "she's playing with us." But the fear in his voice betrayed him. It wasn't anger that haunted him, it was recognition. He had underestimated Luna before. If she had survived, if she had orchestrated this, then she was no longer the woman begging for forgiveness. She was something else entirely, someone capable of turning grief into weaponry. And then came the final blow. A security guard from the cemetery approached with trembling hands, holding a small black device found behind the floral arrangements, a camera still recording. When they replayed the footage, it showed a single frame of a figure standing outside the funeral home earlier that day, half hidden by the rain and trees. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same slender frame, the same eyes burning with purpose. Luna. Watching. Breathing. Waiting. Will's world collapsed once more. The woman he had mourned was alive, watching him cradle the child he'd once denied. Bill felt the walls closing in, the empire of lies he had built trembling under her return. Katie, caught between faith and fear, whispered a prayer, not for peace, but for revelation. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth now. The funeral had never been about closure. It was an opening act. Luna had turned her own death into a stage, her resurrection into vengeance. As the night deepened and the guests dispersed in silence, Will remained alone beside the flickering candles, the baby breathing softly in his arms. Somewhere out there, he knew, Luna was watching, waiting for the moment to step back into the light. The note's final words echoed in his mind like a curse and a promise. "You said I lost everything, but I will make you remember what you took." The fire of her revenge had already been lit, and none of them would escape its reach. Not the guilty, not the repentant, not even the innocent child who had become her living proof. Outside, lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the rain-soaked streets. And for a fleeting second, in the glare of that storm, Will thought he saw her reflection in the glass doors. Luna, eyes fierce, lips curved in defiance. Then the light faded, leaving only darkness. But the message was clear. The dead do not rest when the living still owe them the truth. And Luna, wherever she was, had only just begun to collect her debt.